Hello and welcome to episode 20 of the Actual Magicians. Yes, I am an Actual Magicians bookshelf, where this is part 2 of looking at the meaning of the Lenormand cards. Particularly, in this case, the Cyberpunk Lenormand, which we've just finished the Kickstarter, fulfilling that. And so if you want to have a look at the history of the Lenormand cards, I briefed that in the previous video. And I'm just going to keep hoping to do a one take of this with as little editing as possible, just to run through why I chose the keywords, which I've talked about in the previous video. And in this particular video, we're going to be taking a look at some of the extra cards, for example, the maze and the labyrinth, that I chose to accompany the Cyberpunk Lenormand. So let's continue. We did card 18, we're now on card 19, the Tower. I've tried to make this as big and imposing as possible, rising above the clouds, as you can see. And we have bureaucracy, border, observation, big business, and laws. Now, the main reason that I've lent into the bureaucracy and the border side of this is because of the original Lenormand itself. In the original Lenormand, if I can find the Tower for us, the Tower is seen as a border post. It's where you would have to pay your taxes. It's where you would have to, in effect, sign in before you approach the town and so forth. It was a place where they could warn if an enemy was coming and so forth. And this is actually a tower at Nuremberg, I think was the place the deck was designed by Hector in 1799. And you can actually see that tower is actually there. So that's why we know. And also the flag is on the back of the ship as well in the original deck of the Game of Hope in the British Museum. So again, none of these meanings have come out of nowhere. They're not from a book. They're from the research into the original symbolism of the Tower, going back to the Game of Hope itself and dream symbolism, and also the reading of Coffee Grounds as well. So we go from the Tower to the garden. I've done a particularly cyberpunky garden, try to make it vibrant and dark above, get the meaning across. Networking, socializing, society, people, a good group, and listen to other people's advice. Listen to people's advice. The garden, again, at the time was a place of where you would go promenading, where you would meet other people. This is before any other form of social networking. It would either have to be through a dinner, an organized party, or promenading out in the garden where you were safe, where everyone could see you, particularly if you were a woman at the time. You couldn't just go cavorting left, right and centre, so the garden was mainly a place of networking. The mountain, I wanted to put a ecological warning in there. This is a mountain of rubbish. And we have obstruction, obstacle, diversion, and friends in high places. One of the lesser referred to original meanings, I can't remember if I've taken that from the coffee cards or from dream symbolism, but it is an interesting and useful reference in the whole language of Lenormand. We have something for a close friend, we have something for a boss, we have something for a man, a woman, boyfriend, girlfriend, and so forth, but we don't have anything for an influencer. And I was about to say influential person, but I suddenly realised, of course, that would be called an influencer now. The ways, I wanted the famous crossing in Tokyo and a young figure contemplating which way to go, because this is about choice, options, avoiding risk, sticking to the straight and narrow, avoiding risk and excess. So, it reflects its time. The ways is a choice, but if in doubt, keep to the straight and narrow. The mice is about loss, theft, small little bites, incremental steps, and vigilance. The reason I've got vigilance on the card is because in the coffee cards, I think, is a rhyme that says something like, if you want to avoid your servant stealing your money, don't leave it out. Or hiding your money makes it, leaving out your money makes of an honest man a thief. It's basically saying, you have to take some responsibility for not leaving things where they might be taken. So there is a sense of vigilance in this card. The heart, again, cyberpunky style of that. Obviously wanted to make it a heart. Love, romance, union, relationship, contentment, and pleasure. All of the things that the heart should be. And that's fairly straightforward symbolism. The ring takes that into commitment, of course. So that's the first keyword, commitment, a contract, agreement, and a marriage of opposites, which is why I've got both a neon and a metallic. They're both cyberpunky motifs, but I wanted that to show a marriage of opposites, so you almost had a wonky figure of 8 infinity loop in it as well. The book, card 26, I wanted the idea of books still being available, even though they might be lost in the maze of the city, is about learning, discovery, revelation of a secret, lesson, and consideration. So it's about thinking, about the intellect, about the mind, about research, and so forth. Now, the letter is an interesting one because at the time, 1799, letters would have been one thing that would have been brought to you by the messenger card, whereas now letters are a very, very different sort of thing. So I've tried to make it more generic to written communication, a confirmation of information, and a record or facts. This is like fact-checking. When you get it written down, it doesn't have to be literally handwritten down like a letter, but it is about a communication of something that's real, that's set in stone, set in writing, and therefore it's any confirmation, even if it's a email, an RSVP to something, and so forth. A confirmation that someone's received your text is part of the letter. Now, the man is the man, and I've got man, male energy, animus, good business, pleasant news, paternal outlook. Again, it's stereotypical, but this is the nature of the deck. So we have a man, and then I've repeated that for 4 age variations of the man, and same for the woman. It's a woman, feminine energy, anima for the psychology of it, pleasure, favourable business, and maternal outlook. So I've tried to equate the two, balance them out a little bit, but still keep them to their original meanings. And again, we've got different alternate versions of the woman. Now, the lily, again, is an interesting one. I tend to read it as simplicity, but it's also about purity. And again, this is going back to the original context, historical, cultural context of when the Game of Hope was written, and some of the meanings that the coffee cards have, and some of the meanings that it has in coffee ground reading as well, which go back to a repopularisation during Victorian times, for example. So we've got values, virtue, doing the right thing, I guess, is the closest that we get to the idea of virtue these days. It's just doing the right thing, and that's the lily. And keeping it simple, the KISS thing, keep it simple, stupid, that's all in the lily because it's white, it's pure, it's not overdressed, it's not overburdened, it doesn't pretend to be anything other than it is. It's just purity, it's simplicity. I've often found in real readings with the Lenormand that having this as purity is about the best way that I can apply it to things. It sort of means here's where we need to concentrate, here's where we don't need to get carried away with ourselves. This is the area that you need to keep it authentic, which might be another good word for that card as well. Okay, so now we have the Sun, which is lots of luck, success, development, growth and encouragement. And you can see the city is thriving, is growing, the sun is there. In other decks, this might be a very agricultural thing to show the growth, the luck, the success, the development and so forth. But here, because it's a cyberpunk deck, it's an urban deck, it's the city that's growing. And you can see try to keep it thematically similar across the cards, which again is a bit difficult to do with AI designs. And the moon. And again, the moon in Lenormand is not the moon in tarot, neither is the sun per se. The moon is about fame, recognition, getting known, honour, and then, more importantly, from a personal perspective, other people's views of you. It's how you are seen in society, how you're seen at work, how you're seen in the family, or whatever the question might be. The moon is a reflection, and it's closer to the astrological meanings of the moon than the tarot meanings of the moon, which are to do with the unconscious, dreams, visions, all of this sort of thing, fear even, hesitation, unsurety, the unknown. Whereas the moon is actually the known. It's what other people know about you and how that is reflected. And sometimes that's really important to see in a reading. And I do that in a Celtic cross, for example, with tarot, where on the right-hand column of the Celtic cross, I always read the tarot card here at the bottom as how you see yourself, and the card above it as how others see you. And quite often the difference between those two things explains a lot about what's going on in a person's life. And it's a really good thing to consider in a reading, that how other people see you might not be how you think they do or how you feel about yourself or the situation. So here's the second of the two cards that we chose this deck for in the very first place back in the distant days before we announced it at a tarot event. The key to go with the rose of the bouquet, so we could have a rose and a key card in one deck. The Lenormand already had that. So the key is about opening or closing of an issue, access, discovery, or revealing. So basically, it's an unlocking or a locking. This can be compared with the book card, the coffin card, which closes everything down as well, the scythe card, where that's more of a timing issue as to what gets unlocked and what doesn't. It's a really useful card to see where it appears in a spread, in a grand tableau in particular. So the fish back in the day was resources, money, business, market potential and success. It meant that there were a lot of fish in the sea, and this is a particularly cyberpunky stylization of the neon glowing fish that are lit up around the city to perhaps advertise or just decorate the city. Quite like that. The anchor is an interesting one because obviously in Cyberpunk there are no ships, so I had this idea that there was a vast tower or platform and it had almost dropped a sort of anchor that was holding it in position, some sort of counterweight, because in Lenormand, again going back to the Christian symbolism and context, it is hope, long-term, something that is long-term, unlike the birds or the mice, which are very short-term, fixed, stability, standstill, safe harbour and security. Basically a harbour card, a harbouring card. Then finally we have the cross before we look at the extra cards. And again, due to the Christian symbolism of this, and I wanted the idea of religion being utterly lost in the cyberpunk future, but still apparent in strange ways if you look for it, it's still there. And this is burden, suffering, adversity, and being overwhelmed by everything. There's this idea of carrying a cross. It's not a good thing. In the game of hope, from which the cards have come, in part, the cross is you don't want to land on the cross, you want to land on the anchor that's just before it, so that you can win. Whereas if you land on the cross, you have to wait there until someone else goes over it, or you have to roll a dice to go backwards or something. I can't remember the rule, but you need to land on the anchor to win, not the last card, the cross. That will get you stuck, because again, the symbolism, it's almost like you could play cards, play a game, as long as it had some sort of Christian symbolism in it. So you could say to the priests, oh, it's okay, we're teaching our kids Christian morality and virtues, but of course it was a game. It was a parlor game, and also because in the original we had the French and German cards up here, then you could play PK with it as well, a popular game, playing card game, gambling game of the time. So you could send the kids to bed and then use the same deck in order to play a gambling game without being found out. So let's take a look at some of the extra cards that I chose for this deck. Some are similar to the ones that Tolly had suggested to Shiro that he then incorporated. And I think there were 2 versions of Shiro's deck that came out, and I think he extended the extra cards in the second version. I don't recall exactly. The ones I chose were the bridge, and if you go back to the first video, it'll tell you a bit more about why extra cards and so forth. This is about connection, basically, a truce, a balancing out, a reaching across. I wanted the idea, quite often a deck and a spread won't tell you where you need to make a connection, where you need to make that bridge, and so I wanted that card in there. Then we have Maze and Labyrinth, which are sort of the same but different. So they're sort of the same but different. And I'd sort of like the idea that people might confuse the two. That was almost deliberate, because I like the idea of the confusing cards in the deck to be confusing in themselves, a bit like the Hangman in the deck. People want to turn the right way up, which is exactly what you don't want to do with the Hangman. So I quite like that. So the Maze is about a loss of direction, a bit like the Cloud, but this is more deliberate misdirection, that you have gone the wrong way, that it is a dead end, that you're frustrated and so forth. Because a maze is something that you can get lost in, whereas a labyrinth is something that you have to follow round. There is a difference between a labyrinth. And labyrinth, I went for spiritual direction, the pilgrim way, learning from experience, and keeping on your journey, even if you feel lost. That's a sort of bridge from the, if you pardon the pun, from the moon card of the tarot, because I quite like the idea of a spiritual card. And this is like going between the 2 pillars on your spiritual way. Because the moon in the Lenormand is not the moon as in tarot. Then the crown, I wanted this idea of authority, but on a young person's head, as if they're connected, that this might be the way authority gets transmitted to us in the future. So there's a dystopian warning there, which is part of the course for Cyberpunk. We've got control, power, leadership, setting an example in its more positive sense, mastery and service, depending on where it appears in the reading and the context. Mirror Shades was basically, I wanted to go for mask, but I think Shiro chose that as one of his, so I went for a more cyberpunky Mirror Shades, but it still has the same idea, a presentation, hiding the truth, casting shade or even gaslighting, superficial. There's something amiss between the presentation and the reality. And I wanted, again, from doing loads and loads of readings over the last 40 years, there's certain things I know that I want, if they're present in the situation, to be quite clear in the cards. I don't like it when I have a deck that I'm trying to use maybe for the first time and it really doesn't yet have a card that for me means a particular thing that's likely to come up in a reading. So mirror shades when something is not what it appears to be, I wanted built into the deck. And then the gate, which completes the rose key symbolism for our cinematic tarot universe for the Arcadia project and other things. We have the gate as a big symbol. And that's initiation at its highest level, leaving your comfort zone, something new and unknown, an entrance and an exit. So it's like the key, but on a wider sense, not on a detailed sense. And the rose, which is more specific than the bouquet, because then again, I wanted the rose key symbolism, self-worth, sharing your gift, making a life for yourself, reconnecting to your truth. And there's a weird crossover, very deliberate one, to a scene in a Stephen King series. I think it's in the Dark Tower series, about the rose growing out of the concrete there. It's a key moment in that entire series, and it really talks about this idea of multiverses and so forth. So that's hidden in this deck as well. And the font, which is my fountain that I wanted for dedication, consecration, a new life after an upheaval. Again, I know from lots of readings that that's something I want in a deck, and a public display of faith, like perhaps in your boss, if it's a work question, a family member, backing them up, supporting them in front of other people, that sort of thing. You're sort of baptizing, you're consecrating in public, like the fountain in the centre of the town square. Which brings us to the fountain, which is about flow, sustainable energy in yourself, so you're not burning out, a source of information and rapid learning. It's the book on steroids. It's the fountain. That's what you need to do. You need to rapidly go with the flow of something when this card turns up. And then perhaps more, what's the word? Vanity cards. We have the reader, which stands for the reader, but also divination itself. Have you noticed how not many tarot decks have divination as a meaning within them? And yet, for tarot card readers, particularly when you're reading for yourself, you might want to know about doing a divination. So there's a card in that for us. The future, for foretelling, for prediction, for signs and symbols. That shows that, we might need to do a reading, another reading, or a reading about a particular thing that's in this reading. And we have the sitter, which again you can choose if you don't want a man or woman card. You want it more neutral. Questioning, openness, curiosity, advice from experience, and out-of-the-box thinking. So we've got an ambiguous-looking sitter there. And finally, finally, it's time to finish, because we have the time card, which I again wanted because timing is a big issue in readings. And if you can see there, we've got timetable, action plan, and so forth. What else did I put there? Timing, being in the moment, immediate action or plan for action. So just general timing issues. And then where this card appears in a reading, when it appears, you can look at the cards around it to get timing. So that answers a question that everyone always asks is, how do you do timing in a reading? Well, in a Cyberpunk reading, Cyberpunk Lenormand reading, you can do timing in a reading as well. So that takes us to the end of our tour, and we've done two videos. This is the second part. The first part looked at cards 1 to 18 and a bit of the history and meaning and where the card meanings come from. This is the Cyberpunk Lenormand, of which we have copies available, and I'll put a link down below. And we still have some of the 6th edition. We only print 100 at a time in each edition. They always sell out quite quickly, but we still have some. I think we still have a few 5th edition, just a few, like literally a handful. and we still have a relative handful of the original Lenormand. And I don't have a copy of that at the moment. I'm waiting to get a few of the spares from the US, because they come in a tin that has the original cover from the British Museum on the front of it, but I've only got my test tin available to me at the moment. But there are copies of that available as well, and I'll put a link as well if you're interested. So thanks a lot. I hope that's been interesting for learning the Lenormand. Our book, 7-Day Lenormand, under the nom de plume of, I've forgotten it now, Andrea Green. Andrea Green is the best book that I can recommend on Lenormand, because it has where I got these meanings from, all of our research. It was my notebook that I wanted as a handy reference. So it has the Philippe sheet, it has the coffee cards, it has the Game of Hope, it has contemporary meanings, meanings that we derive from all of our research, dream meanings as well. And did you know that Arthur Edward Waite wrote about dream symbolism? And as a result, ended up, I think he covered at least 20 of the 36 images excuse me, that are now in Lenormand. So in effect, Arthur Edward Waite wrote about Lenormand meanings by writing about the equivalent dream meanings as well, which I think is really fascinating. And that's in there as well in the 7-Day Lenormand book. So thank you, and I look forward to seeing you in another Actual Magicians bookshelf video. I tried to do these two videos off script. Most of my things are off script anyway, but I've tried to do that with these two videos because I'm up to here with a load of other projects at the moment, but I did want to talk about the Lenormand with you. So thanks a lot again, and I look forward to seeing you in next week's video, which will be more occult, I think, or I might do the next 10 of the Lenormand series, the Tarot Top 100 Tarot series, which will be on the Lenormand. So while I'm in this general area, I might do my top 10 Lenormand decks, and then we have some contemporary decks, or I might miss out Lenormand decks and just go with 20 of more recent decks that I really enjoy and are part of my top 100 as well. So thanks a lot again, and as ever, the worker is very tiredly, this time round, hidden in the workshop.